Please welcome our panelists, stellar lineup. William Mugayar, please. Sandra Rowe. Jared H.G. Kishore Atreya. Thank you. All right. So, the first question we want to kick this off is, in general, when talking about business, so disruption, let's talk about disruption briefly. Clayton Christensen talks about sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. He must have made famous the word disruptive, unless I haven't read before that. But sustaining means continuing to create high-value products and increase prices, right? So get more of the same markets. And disruptive means come up with something completely new out of the blue that surprises the incumbents and addresses a need that wasn't obvious and eventually becomes the entry point for new entrants. So we're going to talk about decentralization, a decentralizing world. And the first question I get asked all the time, I think it's intuitive, is in general, successful businesses require scale and deep moats and centralization, right? The more centralized, the more you control access and pricing, and the more you can manage your own strategy, the more valuable, the higher the chances to grow the business. So when we talk about decentralization, it sounds like how can companies make money in the decentralized world? That's kind of I think a general concern or question people ask about this. So I'm going to ask the panelists what their point of view is about decentralization. Can successful businesses be decentralized? William?
So I'm William Mugayar. I'm the author of the Business Blockchain. And
sorry, I forgot to
we have to introduce ourselves for
yes.
10 seconds. I live in Toronto, Canada. I'm also an investor in the space. So I think when we look at decentralization, and the way you pose the question maybe is a little bit not 100% right. I would say it's half of the situation. And we look at what companies that we know about today, what do they need to do to get into decentralization, but that's only one aspect. What's going on, especially in this room with the Ethereum being the foundation of it, is that there's a whole new world there. And we can't just not say that, yeah, how do we move into decentralization? It is not something we just move towards. It is something that is just happening, that is emerging on its own. So at the same time that we have big companies that want to get more decentralized, we have new companies that are born decentralized from day one. They are global, they are decentralized, and they have no baggage, and that's how they start. So that is really the force that I see that is potentially even more disruptive than big companies getting into decentralization.
Kishore Atreya from Consensus. I lead our consulting practice and the supply chain initiative. So there is a lot of net new value that decentralization enables. So in that sense, it's not just a technology-oriented activity. It is more beyond technology. It is a natural human-centric activity that occurs. And in the process, the net new value we generate through decentralization is what's causing organizations, individuals to capture into that decentralization value. So, for example, if you think about energy at large, individuals can start producing energy and start participating in the value creation process. Provenance of assets, which doesn't exist today, increases the value of the whole opportunity at large and creates value. So giving a platform where which decentralization provides, allows more wealth and more opportunity and value to be created. And that's net new in my opinion.
Sandra, you have anything to say?
Hi, Sandra Rowe. I look after our digitization efforts at CME Group, which some of you might know as the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. From our perspective, we are one of the big behemoths and incumbents. And you might think, well, hold on, if you are as centralized as you are, because you are a set of exchanges and you've got one of the largest clearing houses in the world, you're kind of in trouble. Well, I look at it two ways. One is, it is definitely harder to disrupt or to evolve something that is as large as we are. We're a 42 billion market cap company with over a quadrillion notional trading through our platform at any given year. These are big numbers. And so, yes, it's a challenge to evolve. It's not really what I would call disruption. It's more what I would call evolution, right? Steering that big Titanic ship in a direction or trying to make it more nimble. There are other things that big corporates do, though, that I think is underestimated. The ones who are forward-thinking are always looking for opportunities to create new ways of doing things. And when you do that, that's where it's a lot easier when you can create something new. And just to give you one quick example, you know, we announced with the the UK government, Her Majesty's Treasury last year, that we're launching a digital gold product. That is actually a decentralized model. It may not be as decentralized as, you know, some people would anticipate to be, but from an exchange standpoint, it's actually a decentralized model. So I'm happy to talk about that later. But the point being is, you know, creating something new, corporates do that all the time. I think it's just sometimes undervalued.
So Jared Harwin-Gdansky, I'm the #2 for emerging business and technology at BNY Mellon. We're focused on a lot of interesting things, but blockchain in particular right now. I'll give kind of a two-sided answer. So I think, as William pointed out, right, decentralized models enable new businesses and new business models and potentially new revenue centers, which may potentially put pressure on incumbents, may offer new opportunities for them. But I also think that, and I'm sure this will kind of upset some of the cypherpunks in the room, this isn't going to be quite as disruptive as you think, right? Like, BNY Mellon, we're an institutional bank. Most of you, there's no BNY Mellon ATM that you can go to and get cash. You know, we move billions of dollars for clients. We have $30 trillion in assets. Most of our clients don't want to like run and maintain their own, you know, Ethereum node, okay? They're still going to go to BNY Mellon to do what we've done for 2 centuries, which is provide services for large institutional clients. So I don't think there's going to be as much disruption, and I think there are also new opportunities. And BNY Mellon is very interested in looking at decentralization as a resiliency tool for keeping critical infrastructure like our payment systems, our government clearing systems, online.
Anything else, Luke?
Yeah, I was about to say that we tend to talk about centralization and decentralization as though it's one or the other. I think that's going to coexist, and the significant set of use cases that you're seeing should not have been centralized in the first place, and they will start shifting towards decentralization.
Okay, Luke gave, I think, a good overview of the expectations and the dreams when the internet emerged, right? This, in the Declaration of Independence, this is going to be completely decentralized. But the reality is that over the years, the internet became, you know, pockets of centralization occurred, right? And we are seeing that today, right? The technology, the underlying technology is decentralized, but the governance or the business on top are not. So what is the end state you envision? I agree with Kishore that there's a transition that needs to happen. But what is the end state that is enabled with technologies like Ethereum, where there's democratization of control, democratization of ownership?
I think we're still, by and large, in the installation phase of this new world. And this installation phase is very technical, as you said. And it usually precedes the deployment phase, where the applications are going to be more relevant. So right now, I'll be the first to admit that we don't know a whole lot about the business aspects of decentralizations, the true aspects of it. We are barely getting to know the way that we do decentralized technologies again. So before we get into applications, we have to have the infrastructure that is decentralized, and then we get into middleware, and then we get the applications after. And just as a reminder, when when the cell phones came in, and we didn't use the landlines infrastructure to install a cellular system. It was all new cell towers. Same thing when the web arrived. We didn't use the mainframe computers to power the web 22 years ago. So we have to keep in mind that there is a new infrastructure that is being built right now. And the way you build it is from the ground up with the technical parts first. And now we're just starting to get good at that. And then later it's going to be the applications that will be more prevalent.
If I may add on that, actually, I have to say, that's what it really excites me about this technology, is not about the fact that we just talk about decentralization, but people are building infrastructure now that can be shared. And the concept of shared infrastructure will be very powerful. Plus, when you add mobile telephones being as prevalent as they are around the world, firms like mine can help to democratize financial services over time. And that ability to distribute and offer people at micro level around the world is a very powerful thing. And that's what gets me excited.
I think the idea of developing and deploying new infrastructure is in and of itself its own merit, right? There was a great Freakonomics podcast about the merits of maintenance and just like improving infrastructure. If this is a conversation starter for that, then I think that has merits on its own. But inherently, the architecture allows you to do things that previously you hadn't been able to. And you get to unlock new markets, you get to help people, hopefully, as you lower costs, right, and you have a more efficient and more transparent and hopefully more stable, infrastructure. Obviously, I'm thinking specifically about financial infrastructure, but I think it applies across industries. You're going to see a lot more value coming out of those verticals and those industries. So it's cool.
So the end state is probably very hard to predict because the vacillation from centralization to decentralization. The end state from centralization to decentralization is definitely going to be hard to predict because we are going to pick some bad use cases and move them over to decentralize and probably come back. So in that sense, it's going to be an exploratory journey, but leveraging on the infrastructure that we are building today. So in that sense, it will move. I think there are going to be very logical use cases, like individuals participating in the economy more explicitly and directly. And not having to deal with intermediaries that are non-value adding in the centralization process. So to that extent, I think the transition will be interesting.
Interesting. Jared, do you want to add something?
So I just want to make a quick comment, which I think you really hit the nail on the head here. It's very tempting, and this is more for my corporate brethren, it's very tempting to go and say, oh, we have this process, we're just going to decentralize it. There's an opportunity here to start rethinking your processes, and I would say think about what you're trying to achieve as an outcome and work back from there as opposed to saying, we do it this way, we're just going to put it on a blockchain.
I agree with that, yeah.
Now I want to reemphasize what Sandra said about the fact that now this is about a shared infrastructure. And this is a very important point because as part of the future, the users are the infrastructure. Now this is what's new. And for everybody in this room, we should be all becoming users of these new decentralized services. For every centralized service that we know of today, starting with Facebook and goes down from there, there is going to be a version that is decentralized, that is very small right now, that maybe has a handful or 0 customers or users, but the users are us. So we have to start to experiment and start to go on these new platforms.
I just wanted to make a comment on what Jared said, and Kishore also, that if there's a salutary effect of the emergence of blockchains that is kind of collateral, it's the fact that it has woken up any enterprise, even startups, into thinking how to re-engineer things. So even with older technologies like business process outsourcing, artificial intelligence are more emerging now and growing in evolution and development. Even if you don't use a blockchain or DLT technology, companies are, I think, innovating because of the emergence of blockchain in the last few years.
Completely agree, and actually there's a trend that I think is very real. We're doing it ourselves at our firm, which is the collaboration of what I would call unexpected actors. Working with government, working with big corporates, working with fintech firms, anywhere in the world essentially, to come together who have different sets of expertise and advancing that disruption or that creation of the next thing, cool thing. Those collaborations are multiplying around the world, and I think actually that is a very good trend.
I was just going to say, I think it's not just blockchain. I think that there's a timing is everything component. You have a bunch of different technologies that are coming together at the same time that are allowing people to start rethinking how they do kind of their business. And I'd probably say actually from the big corporate standpoint, or at least the big financial standpoint, probably cloud post '08 was the initial kind of spur, because people said we're spending a lot of money on infrastructure and this is a lot cheaper, and how can we get on that?
Right. Go on.
I just want to add beyond the cloud, IoT. I mean, I think IoT as a core enabler of anything decentralized finds its logical landing point on a blockchain. So that just amplifies it disproportionately.
So there's one question here that it's provocative, and I hesitate to make it. But so there's going to be first of all, is decentralization better than non-decentralization, and why is it better?
It's better the way we are today because there is the factor of open source and crowd-based innovation that decentralization enables better than centrally controlled systems. Because, again, if I use the analogy of Facebook, it's not just Facebook engineers that are developing the systems for them. We can use Ethereum. It's engineers everywhere in the world. So innovation is now open, and the idea, and based on what we have seen the last 3 years, we can get to better results when the innovation is open-ended that way.
There's going to be winners and losers in this evolution, right? So can we talk about that? Who's going to be winning? Who's going to be losing?
I want to take your previous question.
I said it was provocative.
The human instinct is to be decentralized. So centralization is a very artificial thing that has happened over time. So in many ways, we tend to gravitate towards decentralization.
However, we trust authorities all the time. We trust brands. We trust, when we go into any organization and we look at who's the authority, who is behind it. Or if we don't know the quality of the product, we trust the brand. So there's some anchorage, psychological anchor to an authority, whether real or fictional. So it came to my mind. It may not mean anything.
Just a quick point on that.
Yes.
I think what we have to think about in a decentralized world is what happens when things go wrong. And I mean terribly wrong.
Okay.
And I'm not just talking about financial services, because it's all great when things are functioning, but the reason why centralization exists in many ways is because when things go wrong, people want to go to a thing or a institution and place blame, or get retribution or funding, or their funds back. I think that has to be given some careful thought. What do you do in a decentralized world when things go wrong?
Well, the community fixes it, like Ethereum. That's what happened. I mean, and we will get used to those kinds of things. If the governance is properly put in place, I think there is checks and balances, and we shouldn't be afraid of experimenting with these kinds of self-regulated, self-managed systems. And we're very in the early days of it, though, so it is scary, yes.
So I'm going to answer all three of those questions. This is going to be a very Jared answer for those of you who know me. Joe's already laughing. And Andrew. So decentralization versus centralization. The answer is it depends, right? So decentralization in the sense of open source, lots of people looking at things, probably a good thing. Decentralization is in, the kind of, there will be no banks, there'll be no institutions, it'll all be on a blockchain. it depends on the application. There are plenty of applications where centralization is fine, where there's trust, where people don't need the computational overhead of decentralization. And then as far as kind of, I would disagree. I actually think centralization is a relatively human attribute. And I think when you see people pulling resources and doing irrigation and forming agricultural systems, you've seen kind of technology advance. There is a balance. You need to have just enough organization for organized chaos to be productive.
Take that since he disagreed.
Okay.
So I
We
do
like a
think
debate.
that's my point. So the whole idea here is I do agree with Jared on certain things about how centralization is relevant in certain contexts, but it is contextual. But the intrinsic nature of humans to be decentralized cannot be disputed because you painted the very positive side of being able to go to an organization, go to a leadership, and get things resolved or answered or paid back. Right. At the same time, what we also don't typically tend to like is being controlled, managed, and being told what to do. So that is the dichotomy in the other side of being in a centralized structure.
My risk management in mind tells me to go into the challenges and obstacles and problems, but I'm not going to go there. William wrote a whole chapter on that, and the mental blocks, challenges, very thorough list of obstacles that need to be overcome. So, but we have a few minutes left. I was rereading Peter Thiel's 7 questions in 0 to 1, and he gives a kind of a recipe or a checklist to verify whether a business will be successful. He says the engineering question: do we have the engineering? I would say check. The blockchains are already out there. They're evolving. Timing: is it the right time? Is the timing right? It's arguably so. Then the monopoly question, which was my first question: where's the unfair advantage in a fully decentralized world, right? For a business, I'm talking about a business. We're talking about disruption or being disrupted. So the monopoly question to me is a bit unclear yet. But then we have the distribution question, the durability, resilience. Arguably, these technologies are going to be much more resilient than centralized systems. And then the secret question. He also talks about the secret question. What is your secret sauce to succeed? So do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think the concept of business may be changing because it is not just the business now that is the main element that is benefiting here. What we are seeing with these new network-based decentralization networks, everything is shared from day one. And if the users come and they provide value to the network and to these new infrastructure systems that are based on decentralization, then the closest thing that resembles a central thing would be the foundation behind it or the organization and the developers that are developing it. They share with that reward. So the concept of the center being the business that benefits, I think, is going to go away, and everybody's going to share, including those that created it, because we are all part of it now, and it's a matter of balancing all of this benefit.
And also, any final thoughts about disrupting or being disrupted? We have 2-3 minutes.
I would say pick the right use case for decentralization.
When I think about financial services, or when I think about this technology, I think it's hugely exciting and it's pervasive. Financial services is one where different pieces of financial services are being quote unquote disrupted, but I think a lot of people think that it will probably take longer than other areas because of the regulations and sort of incumbent, probably slow to move, evolution on this. It happens. I agree that a shared infrastructure is where we're going. It's pretty, the trend seems pretty dominant now. That
It's happening
this is
with
where
the
we're
cloud
going.
already.
Yes. The question will be is how quickly does it go and in what sectors? And I do think financial services, although it gets a lot of attention and it's been talked about the most, it's probably going to be a laggard over time.
So I'll be a contrarian here. I don't think that. Thanks, Andrew. I don't think that the whole world's going to change overnight. I think that aspects of it, I think core infrastructure are going to change. I think a lot of these businesses aren't going to go away. I think a lot of them on the kind of disrupted to be disrupted kind of part, yeah, you're going to have to change how you operate. And if any business, regardless of technology, is completely inflexible and unable to look at new business models, new technologies, and new ways of operating, they're probably not going to be doing well. I think also, from an enterprise perspective, the idea of, oh, there's the blockchain is wrong. There are going to be different technologies. There are going to be distributed ledger-inspired things. You're going to have straight blockchains for certain applications, and you're going to have permission blockchains for others.
A hybrid ecosystem.
Yeah, and I mean, but it makes sense. I mean, you still have intranets that aren't hooked up. You have internal networks that aren't hooked up to the to the larger internet today, and I think we're pretty fully connected. So I think the idea that there's going to be this monolithic, the blockchain. I know maybe this is raining on some people's parades, but it's not going to be. We're not all running on public Ethereum. It's not going to happen. And I'm more than happy to, if you want to find me, I'm more than happy to explain why I feel that way. Please leave the pitchforks and torches behind.
Any final 8 seconds, 7, 6.
We're still in the early stages. This is a 10-year thing at least.
So I don't think Jared is contradictory. I mean, he's agreeing. So it's like, it's not open source versus proprietary software. They coexist. I mean, and it's not decentralized or centralized. I mean, they all coexist, and it's shades of gray.
Sandra?
One last thought. I actually think developing nations have a real advantage here. They don't have a lot of these legacy infrastructure problems.
Good point.
This is an ability to leapfrog, and that's, I think, really, I hope developing nations take advantage of this.
I hope this was useful. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.